Booktube champion, I'm the Brazen Bell, coming at you with a time travel tale. Let me tell you about a book I read, Octavia E. Butler's Kindred. It's effective, pared down, and powerful. Characters and prose, it's all wonderful. 19th century, bicentennial. Onward marches time. Do things change at all? Nazi regime. Looks to America. Apartheid too, down in South Africa. What is the price we pay for empathy? Seek to redeem one's vile humanity. Dana meets her ancestor, slave owner by the name of Rufus. He's a monster. No explanation for how she goes back, except to keep the family line on track. Dressed like a man, according to Rufus' slaves. Becomes like his father, but still she saves Rufus. Friends with Alice from a young age, knows no boundaries, so he gives her babes. Biblical baby. Her name is Hagar. Ensure her birth, her freedom, and a scar. Hello, my name is Lucas, this is A Bit of Lit, and I'm here to talk about Kindred by Octavia E. Butler, which is a fantastic novel that I highly recommend if you haven't read it before. If you like these kind of things, where I put a little poetry at the beginning, let me know, and I will continue to do that. Share the video, subscribe, that would be great. Like it, of course, and comment. Let me know what you think of the video. Let me know what you think of the book. Let me know how your day is. Something like that. This book follows Dana, who is a young black woman who's a writer, and she's married to Kevin, who's a white man, and she inexplicably goes back in time to save her ancestor, who is the son of a slave owner. And luckily for her, she's able to figure out who he is based on the family lineage that she knows, and remembering that how far back it goes. She's transported to the early 19th century, throughout the time period that she goes throughout Rufus's life, as he gets older and older, every time she goes back, Rufus is facing his own mortality and about to die, whether it's from drowning or starting a fire or shooting himself, for example, about to shoot himself at least. She goes back. Likewise, whenever her life is in danger, she will go to the present. And we see Dana do her best to try and humanize and redeem this ancestor of hers that starts off definitely a product of his time and his sort of education with everything he sees from his father. And he isn't so mean-spirited as his father, so Dana gets the idea that I need to leave a really good impression on him for however long I'm going to be here, so that he will turn out to be better than his time might permit. For example, especially in the South, where slavery and slave ownership was more rampant. However, this was misguided because she's only there every now and again for however long, maybe a short amount of time, maybe a few months, but he is there his whole life. And so he is going to learn far more how to behave based on what he's experiencing every day, which is slave ownership. And so he is a monster, and there's no redeeming him. He's got his emotions, he's not inhumane because his humanity is, it's there. It's just vile and gross and disturbing and something we don't want to wrangle with in a way, but we must, as Dana does. This book really explores that dynamic. Dana lets him know early on who she is, essentially a guardian angel, and that she comes back to save his life, and that eventually she might just not do it anymore because she doesn't want to be mistreated, because each time she comes back, early on Rufus treats her very well and likes her, and then because of his self-entitlement, which he exposes that personal character trait through how he treats Dana and also Alice, who is a woman he becomes fixated on that was his friend early on in his life. But later, his slave and forced lover, because he forces himself upon her, even though she's married to another slave, he can't accept that. Rufus becomes very self-entitled with Dana and starts mistreating her constantly anyway, but starts acting like, I didn't have to do this, I didn't do it to you, and he'll order her beating or her whipping or this or that, and act like he's innocent as well. He's a gross, disgusting human being. However, Dana must stick around long enough to make sure that Hagar is born. And Hagar, I hope I'm saying that name right. Hagar is Alice's child that is named after a biblical character who was a slave, born into slavery and became free. And of course, this kind of book also wrangles with some stereotypes that come surrounding slavery and slaves. For example, there is, especially if you see Gone with the Wind, which I believe is name dropped in the book, there is a stereotype of a compliant woman slave that keeps everyone else in line and keeps them sort of happy in a way. A mammy character, that's my understanding of what this caricature is supposed to be. And this book does such a hard-hitting, painfully emotional exploration of how that kind of person might come to exist. And we see it through Sarah, I believe is her name. And she is a character that has had many children, all of them sold away, except her last one. And her last child is there as a warning and a threat to her. If you misbehave, if you don't keep the others in line, we will sell your last child. And so, wanting to keep her family as intact as she possibly can with what little control she has, she fulfills this stereotype. And it's not out of just some desire to please or whatever. It's out of fear and desperation that she does this. And I mean, all the characters that we've also got Nigel as well, another great character that really wants to learn to read, and this causes great problems for Dana and many other slaves. And it's just a really great, empathetic book. And it shows that there is a consequence, in a way, for trying to redeem monsters. There is also just this really great way that Octavia E. Butler shows how slavery becomes normalized, because there's a time that Kevin comes back with Dana, and he's treated better. Not to say his life is easy, certainly infinitely easier than the slaves, because he's treated as a white man, so he's just going to be treated better, but he's treated as a not well by the Whalen family, because the Whalens are not very trusting of educated slaves, which is how they view Dana, because they think that Dana is not his wife, but in fact his slave. And there's a point where Dana accidentally leaves him behind because her life is in danger because she's been whipped for teaching Nigel to read. And she doesn't come back until, it's only a couple days for her, but for Kevin it is 5 years, and he's got a scar. I mean, he's damaged. But there are some things that he says before she disappears where he's saying something like, well, it's not as bad as I imagined it. But he doesn't know the reality that Dana is going through, and what Nigel is going through, and Sarah and Alice, what they're really going through. And there is a line directly, like, I see how easily slavery becomes normalized. Or there is this element of how time moves forward, of course linearly, but not necessarily in a progressive way. That is to say, when Dana comes back, she starts reading about something to do with Nazi Germany, or at least remembering about what she's read about Nazi Germany and the things that the atrocities they were committing Jewish people. And also there's a time where she's mindlessly watching TV, and what's on TV, she's not really focusing on it, but what's on TV is South Africa apartheid. And she starts thinking about what that means, and how that relates to, just like when she was thinking about the Jews, how that relates to the atrocities of slavery in America. And there are still atrocities throughout time. Self-entitlement of Rufus, and how he takes advantage of Alice, and how he seals his own fate by the end. And this is a spoiler. By the end, he's sealed his own fate, and he's caused Alice to kill herself, and he's about to commit suicide. That's what brings Dana back. And by now, there has been a lot of trust broken down between the two, and there's been just irreparable damage to this relationship that was heavily one-sided, yet Dana kept trying and caring and trying to see some good in him and hang on to that and try to let it flourish, and it's just not there. He's just a sad sack of a man. Anyway, after all this betrayal and mistrust and mistreatment, what he did was sold Alice's children, and he constantly acts like the things that he does, especially after his father dies, but also before his father dies too, are out of his control, and he had to do it, trying to push blame off of himself. He's ashamed and embarrassed, and he doesn't want to accept that. He's also proud and covetous, and this and so many other things. And this seals his fate, and eventually, not caring about the consequences, Dana offs him. And this causes a lot of trouble. He's killed, and Nigel comes in, horrified by what he's seeing, and he does everything he can. Dana goes back in time, but she's stuck to the wall. Her arm is in it, and she comes out completely scarred, having lost her left arm, which is why in the Brazen Bell part, I didn't, or he did not show his left hand. And I think it's just, like, of course she would be scarred. Maybe not necessarily losing her arm. That's where Rufus was holding on to her in the last moments when she was there. And that's why her arm was in the wall. But this kind of experience, I mean, her husband is scarred. And he's not even a slave. Or he's not even treated as a slave. And he'd been there longer overall. if he's going to be scarred even by this experience, she's going to have even deeper scars and deeper wounds. And I think, it's a great book to expose these ugly, horrible scars of American history.